People are going to think I'm so crazy. Doesn't matter. It's true. You can look it up. Who comes along but Rockefeller? That's who comes along. Rockefeller comes along.
Oh, yes.
And really what happens is there was a man who came up to him and told him, hey, we've figured out a way that we can use petrol and oil and make medicine out of it. We can make these medicines way cheaper. And guess what? We can make you so much richer if you'll invest in pharmaceuticals. And people probably don't know this, but Rockefeller actually used to be treated with homeopathy. This is literally in his biography. He had a homeopath.
Welcome to the Feminine Alchemy Podcast, where we explore the truth about the feminine, the peaceful, the wild, and the visceral. I'm your host, J.N. Behringer, joined by my co-hosts, Julie Dean Richards and Kaylee Rose. Each week, we explore the deep mysteries of the feminine and help listeners apply them to their daily lives in a practical way. Join us to unlock the hidden wisdoms your soul has been waiting for.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Feminine Alchemy. I am so excited to again be joined by my friend Jocelyn Peterson. We had an amazing conversation all about her book, All Things in One, Reuniting Religion with the Woman in the Wilderness. And during that conversation, we started to touch on something else that Jocelyn and I are incredibly passionate about, which is how the medical system affects women. And what has happened to women over the years? Why does this matter? Why this is just as important as breaking down our barriers with structures and systems and religious societies, taking away things like the feminine side of God. This is just as important to that, and we want to talk about it. We left a lot of people hanging in our last conversation, so we're going to chat a little bit more about those things. But I just wanted to address, and Jocelyn will speak to this as well, a lot of people would say, like, what does the medical system have to do with femininity? It has everything to do with femininity, number one. But the short answer to that is the body is incredibly feminine. The connection to your physical body, that's how you get connected to your intuition. The feminine is all about the body. We create bodies, and not just that that's the only focus, but our body is a huge part of our power. And when we separate that from the spiritual and from our mind, then we really take away the feminine. It's another way that we suppress our feminine gifts and talents. Do you want to say anything about that, Jocelyn?
Yeah, I will just say that, my studies have been focused primarily on psychiatry, the psychiatric and medical industries, and also religion, which is an interesting combination, and yet they go together so perfectly. And what I have seen in both is this separation of the body from the mind and the spirit. And the problem with that is I would say it's like a three-legged stool. If you're missing a leg, it just collapses, and whoever's sitting on that is going to get hurt. And that's what I've seen, whether it's the religious aspect that separates God out from our bodies and makes the bodies evil and makes women's sexuality evil, right? Because like you said, like we are the ones, that is our power. So when God doesn't have a body, or when our passions are evil, and our physical intuition and instincts are evil, inherently women are going to be vilified in that, to the point where it literally plays out where you are burning women's bodies, right? And the same thing happens in our day and age, but what we have is a separation of the medical system, the separation of physical. The physical is actually elevated, and spirituals just sort of doesn't even exist, because according to empiricism, you only have 5 senses. If you can't see, taste, touch, smell, or hear it, it doesn't exist. And when you do that, you're separating women from their spiritual gifts, from their intuition, which is, again, and I'm coming at this like from a theological perspective. Women's intuition is there in the book of Genesis. It's this enmity. It's a gift that's given to Eve as a weapon to help her overcome the adversary. So you're taking away one of women's greatest powers. So when we walk into a doctor's office and they say, you need to do this, and our intuition is saying, I don't feel good about that. Well, that doesn't count. that's not logical. It's crazy or whatever. And so again, what you have actually are genocidal numbers of people dying from the medical system because we place so much faith and trust in this imbalanced system.
Yes. And to explain this, Jocelyn and I decided we just got to start a little bit from the beginning. And it's not the beginning, but
Not
we're going to
Genesis
go
beginning.
not Genesis beginning,
Okay, but yeah.
but like 1400s, 1400s
Yeah.
beginning. And we're going to do this almost like a little history lesson to help people understand how medicine has affected women over time, how it has been integral in stomping out the feminine in so many ways, in so many places, and just kind of show you where does this come from? We're going to be touching on things like, of course, Jocelyn is so versed in psychiatrics. We will be talking about that. I will be talking a lot about the birth aspect of it. And we'll just start from there. So where should we start in the 1400s, Jocelyn?
Okay. Well, so first of all, let's just understand that originally any sort of medicine that was practiced that went bad, you had these trials. Now, the words that we started off with were words like Beneficia, or Beneficia is just, it really is what evolved into the word witch, actually. And if somebody did bad medicine, you would basically just have a medical malpractice suit. But those things were only focused really on the physical. So before the it's really all medicine included both the spiritual and the physical. But the only things that could really be proven in trials and things like that were like the physical, and it was just did somebody harm somebody, or whatever, or did they not? But then when you sort of combine this with the dogmas of Western Christianity and the Roman Catholic Church, as things start happening in Europe, the spiritual and I would say physical nature of medicine are kind of commandeered by the church. So, for instance, a lot of medicine was practiced in monasteries, but at the same time, you have all these women who are naturally gifted at these spiritual and physical healing methods. A lot of these things were just handed down verbally, or through symbols and things like that. So you had a lot of really talented lay healers, particularly women. And we mentioned this in our last conversation. And this is a problem because this provided kind of this magical competition with these physicians who came through these institutions. So what starts to happen then is they start accusing these lay healers of being satanically inspired or whatever, or they're just, sometimes it's just that they're dumb and I don't know, and of course it's really easy to marginalize women. A lot of these were midwives. So you started having this preacher, his name was Bernardino of Siena. He was called the Apostle of Italy. And he was sort of like, it'd be like just this firebrand now, maybe on Twitter, just somebody who he's just so inflammatory that everybody comes out to listen to what he has to say, even though he's just talking nonsense. But he really starts getting people riled up for some reason about these lay healers. And I have this quote here. It's actually from this fantastic book called The Witch's Ointment by Thomas Hatsis. And it says, "Oh, doctors, how much you have studied, and at much expense, peril, and labor, but it is the dog-faced old woman who gathers all the honor." Right? So he's trying to inflame sort of the ego. And to what purpose? I don't know. Why he had it out for women. I mean, misogyny is nothing new. But he started targeting women. And so then what starts to happen is, well, you start to have this coalescing of this witch archetype for one thing, but then they started passing laws. So they tried to pass laws that no men could practice it without like a license or something that was handed out from an institution, and no women, period. No women were now allowed to practice medicine at all. So that's kind of what starts happening during the Renaissance era, which then, of course, morphs into the Age of Enlightenment.
Yes. And this is huge, right? To take us back a little bit, because I think part of the reason that quote is important is because it shows how much people did depend on women to take care of them and to heal them, and that women have been seen as healers, so much so that they didn't want to go to men. Now, during this time, a lot of the practices that were going on is like we're doing things like bloodletting. We're trying lots of different stuff with the medical institutions. But the midwives and the women, they were using traditional healing methods that had been taught, like Jocelyn said, for thousands of years. And those worked. And these new things were not taken so well. Like, who wants to put leeches on them? Who wants to be bloodlet in that way? Or who wants to be cut and dried and all the things that we used to do to people as a medical institution? Of course, people were afraid of that. And that's part of the reason they flocked more to, well, these women who knew what they were doing and had been doing it and intuited it and knew what was going on. Tiny little side note there, long before we had alchemy, like the masculine form of alchemy, there was a woman who did a lot of the same things that alchemists did anyway, and had a lot of this information. And it's a lot of her information that women had passed down for thousands of years, long before we started talking about chemistry and things like that. And so women had this knowledge very, very anciently. But then you get these laws, right? As Jocelyn and I talked about, we start looking at deity as only masculine. We start seeing only the masculine can lead and only the masculine can do things. So therefore, the masculine must be the healers. And so then we go into the Age of Enlightenment. And what happens in the Age of Enlightenment, Jocelyn?
Well, I mean, with the Age of Enlightenment, interestingly, you do sort of douse the pyres of the witchcraft pyres, douse the flames, so to speak, because the religious institutions aren't the ones who are as powerful now. But what happens is now these scientific institutions become more powerful, and for a good reason. They separate themselves out from anything spiritual, because these witchcraft trials were just basically based on circumstantial evidence and nonsense. And so they really tried to hone in and make everything about evidence, right? It needs to follow logic, et cetera, et cetera. So that's understandable, because that gave them the freedom maybe to study things more. But what they did is they developed this philosophy of empiricism that said, if you can't taste, touch, smell, see, hear something, it doesn't count. It doesn't basically exist. And so you have this complete disconnect, this complete separation of the physical from the spiritual. And remember, these healers, it was always combined. You never had anything medical that wasn't spiritual on some level. And by spiritual, maybe in modern parlance, we might just call it psychology. Some of it was psychological. Sometimes they would just pray over the herbs that they collected. Or it could be energy work. It would look a lot probably like what today we would call different forms of energy work. So yeah, the problem with that though, and it's hard to really get into as much here, I talk about this in my book, you can't separate out the physical and the spiritual like that and marginalize one or the other without marginalizing women. Women always get caught up in this when there's this imbalance, because the imbalance always skews masculine. Inevitably, even if it's religion or whether it's the scientific institutions, it's always going to skew masculine. And so unfortunately, then everything feminine gets pushed to the side or dismissed or attacked. And that's what we start to see in the Age of Enlightenment, particularly in the medical field, particularly in the field of psychiatry, which the difference is psychology is looking at the mind. You have people like Jung who looked at archetypes, things like that. Psychiatry tried to medicalize psychology, particularly later on in the 20th century, with literally getting involved with medications and prescribing. They try to become more seen as like a more legitimate field by becoming more medicalized in that way.
Yeah, and psychiatry is going to become very important with how we marginalize women and the thing that's happening over time. So we have these laws to pick up where we are. We have the Age of Enlightenment, the 1500s. Then in the 1600s, we start exploring America and things like that. Now, of course, the one place that the medical system hadn't touched as much was birth, because women traditionally are always seen as midwives. You know, the midwife comes and she catches the baby and she does the stuff, right? And back in those days, this is something I just want to point out, is when the midwives come, we never use the word delivered. We never said the midwife delivered the baby. The doctor, now we say the doctor delivered. Where are you going to deliver? Where's the deliver? And that had only been used in context of like a savior or religious context is delivery. And so that word delivery comes much later in the 1800s when men start taking over the medical system. What we've got in the 1700s now is like Jocelyn said, women are being locked out of lots of other medical practices and healing practices that they used to do. They're still here and there. However, the place that they have is this place of birth, being able to, help women and women's distress and the things that happen to women. In the 1700s, we always are saying, we as a society, we look back and we're like, I'm sure so many babies were dying in the 1700s. Oh my gosh, so many babies must be just dying and dying and dying.
Right.
And that's not true. It's not true. Babies were not dying as much as we think. Yes, some babies died. Most of the time, what babies were dying of are not what we think. It's not actually of birth causes. It's of malnutrition, right? Later, it's of the hard times in the winter. We develop something because of the malnutrition piece. Women develop something called rickets, and rickets is where your pelvis can actually be malformed. And if your pelvis is actually malformed, it's pretty hard to get a baby out of it, right? But actually, for the most part, midwives knew how to take care of women so they didn't get infections. Women weren't dying at the rate that we think that they were. Babies were not dying at the rate that they think they were. But what happens then? Then we get surgeons who come in because men have locked out women everywhere else. Then men are become very interested in surgery, and they become very interested in birth and being part of births, which they were never part of before. The way women always helped women, you always called your neighbor. Everybody knew how to help you with your baby. And the doctor was totally separate. What he did was very separate. Then doctors get really interested in it. And part of the reason, this ties back into psychology, I promise, and psychiatry.
No worries.
Part of the reason that men get very interested in this is partially because of the term hysteria. Women and hysteria. Women are hysterical. So what is hysteria, Jocelyn? Let's talk about the psychiatry and hysteria and women.
I mean, so what people have to understand is diagnoses like hysteria, depression, ADHD, anxiety. These aren't based on real medical studies. They're not based on actual evidence that would hold up, I would say, in a medical trial of any kind or a court of law. They just sort of like survey each other and say, are you seeing this? Yeah, I'm seeing this. I'm seeing that. And then they agree, well, let's call it this. Then they put it out in the psychiatric diagnostic manual. I mean, that's literally how this stuff works. And that's how we medicate people. So, for various reasons, including misogyny, including the separation of the spiritual from the physical. And also, honestly, when I say misogyny, what I mean is anytime a man is feeling threatened by a woman, he's trying to justify the abuse of that woman. And psychiatry was a really easy way to do that. It was a very logical way. You could diagnose a woman with something, and then you were a bad guy. And then you're killing two birds with one stone, right? You got to be a good guy because you're helping this woman. And now you're also getting rid of her. So what starts to happen is they've always had these, but in America in particular, in the 1800s, you start getting these diagnoses of women who are hysterical or whatever. And they could be diagnosed as insane for doing something as simple as disagreeing with her husband's politics or reading a book. And men could institutionalize their wives or the women in their family for these things. So we have the case of Elizabeth Packard in the 1800s. She disagreed with her husband, who was a minister, on some of his religious stances, and they locked her away until finally it came to court and she actually fought to have more oversight. I mean, even to this day, there's not a lot of oversight in psychiatric institutions. People can be locked up in there for any reason, and you can't call a lawyer. You can't call family members. You have no bodily autonomy. Like, if you are deemed crazy for whatever reason, they have complete control over you. And really, that's such a horrible, I guess, metaphor for a patriarchal society, right? Is to control women, to control women's bodies, to control women's minds. And that's really the dark side of psychiatry. And I'm not saying that psychiatrists are evil people. I happen to know and love some very wonderful psychiatrists. But I'm just saying, when you have an overly masculinized institution that's separated out from the feminine and from the spiritual and from the mind, in that way, ironically, the mind, this is what happens is the vulnerable in society are easily abused and marginalized in these ways.
Yes. And so during this time, right, it's this buildup near the end of the 1700s, especially in America. We're trying to take it all these things on, and we're trying to build ourselves up as a society. So we're trying to create these doctors guilds that come in, and they're so smart, and psychiatrist guilds, and women get very excluded from that because women are seen as like, oh, they can be hysterical at any moment, right? Any emotion that you have, any fit of emotion, or exactly what Jocelyn said, if you disagree, then you can be deemed hysterical and they can be taken out of your hands. So because of all this stuff happening in the psychiatry world, in the birth world, to kind of intertwine this, then doctors are like, well, women are not in a emotional state to be able to catch their own babies. We have to deliver women. And that's when we get these essays about how doctors are deliverers. They are saviors, and they're how could we have survived this long without them? Well, they're here to come deliver us. So they start showing up at births, and you can read this in their letters. There's tons of letters in the guilds. You can read this in the old journals, but they start saying we need to train their husbands to make women do what we want them to do, because it's hard for us to deliver these babies. We have to come in and do all these things. And that's where we get so many misnomers about birth and about the way that birth is supposed to be, is literally from these old letters and what these men have decided. So for example, this is when forceps are invented, because men said, hey, it's really hard for me to deliver a baby when you're standing up, which is usually how traditionally midwives would have you either sit on what's called a birthing stool, and you would be upright and the baby would come out, or you would be standing, or you'd be on all fours. That's the traditional way we give birth. Then when men come in, they say, hey, it's really hard for me. I can't really see the head when you do that, when the baby's coming out. So I want you to lay on your back when we deliver this baby, and you're going to need to push out that way. Well, if you lay on your back, which most women will know, you're not made that way. Your body's not made to push a baby up and over that bone. It's really hard. And so that's where we start getting this pretense of babies getting stuck. And I'm not saying that this never happens. People are going to have so much trauma around this. I'm not saying that it never happens, that babies don't ever get stuck, but really most of the time what happens is baby just can't get up and over that bone because we're laying down, and it's much more difficult and it's really hard. And that starts to happen. Well, what were the doctor's solution to that was, let's introduce forceps, right? Let's introduce forceps, which now should be completely banned, are being completely banned. They cause all kinds of brain damage. There have been so many cases, and this is so disgusting, but it's true, where forceps has literally tore babies' heads off. Okay, this is disgusting.
No,
right?
see, I have a scar. So when my mom went in the hospital with me, my mom, she would have babies so fast, they couldn't even get an epidural or do anything. Like the nurse comes in, gives her a gown. I'm already coming out. But the doctor was in a hurry. And I think that's your point, right? The things that we have in place in these systems, like in birthing in hospitals or even in psychiatry, it wasn't developed necessarily for the wellness of the patient or based on any scientific evidence. It was just based maybe out of convenience. And sometimes that was even financial convenience. But these things that are in place that we don't even question are actually very harmful, because they're not based in anything that is logical. And so this doctor was in a hurry, wanted to get out, used some forceps, even though I was well on my way out, and scarred.
Yeah. And that happens to so many babies, so much brain damage, issues. Can be huge issues from forceps.
Yeah. And of course, and I'm sure you're going to bring this up, but that's when you start getting all these deaths. That's when these babies start dying, because doctors are getting involved in the process. And we don't have hand washing. They don't understand the germ thing yet, but they're inserting themselves into this, and they're going from, doing an autopsy on a cadaver to going in and delivering, this woman's baby.
Well, and that's where our construct, and I bring up the word deliver on purpose, because that's where the construct of doctors as gods really starts and where it comes from. We are here. We're delivering women. We are saviors. We literally, I'm not trying to be overly, to hyperbolize. This is literally what is written in these medical journals. These are the letters that are passed back from these doctors. Thank heavens for us. We saved them. We are the deliverers. That's where the word delivery comes from.
Yeah. And Julie, all anybody has to do is look at TV shows. Okay. Look at the lineup of TV shows. How many TV shows do we have in this day and age that idolize and worship doctors and the medical profession? They are so idolized. And in my book, I call this Weltanschauung. We have this Weltanschauung about science in general, but particularly about the medical field. It's like, trust the science, and they know what they're talking about. And we don't realize how much of the medical profession is actually based on a really sandy foundation. I mean, just the idea of biochemistry, that is the foundation of medicine, is actually really, really a false foundation. And because it's based on, like, our medicine, our pharmaceuticals are based on this idea of biochemistry, we cannot predict outcomes for so many of the medical treatments that we cannot accurately predict outcomes. Look at the package inserts. They will say, we don't even really know how this works. They're just kind of like throwing darts and hoping that they stick. And so when we grow up with this belief that, oh, it's so scientific and it's so evidence-based, and it's just like, we have to, I feel like what you're trying to do is like, let's peel back these layers. Let's break down these false towers of belief that we have so we can actually build on some truth. Because guess what? We're not just a big bag of chemicals. We're made up of energy. And you know who can accurately predict outcomes? Biophysicists.
Yep. It's about energy. And that's the whole point, right? That's why I want to go through the history, is because science is just as much laid down by precedent as the law is. So people might be familiar, I'm an attorney, with this idea of precedence. Precedence is we have to follow what came before us, right? In the law, if there has been a law that's passed and the way that that law has been interpreted, we have to continue to interpret the law the same way it's always been interpreted. And the idea of precedence is it keeps us from going too far astray and like the law evolving, even though it already does. Well, science is exactly the same way, as hopefully people are seeing. That's why I'm bringing this up. Is, for example, to go back to the idea of rickets and your pelvis and being born. Well, yes, if you have a malformed pelvis, it's going to be really hard to get a baby out of your pelvis. However, that does not happen nowadays. You know, I mean, I'm sure in rare cases it does, and in some countries it does. But for the vast majority of women, we don't have rickets anymore because we've solved a lot of the nutritional issues that cause rickets. But constantly, women are told this is where the precedent for you're too little, you better have a C-section. You can't birth a baby. You better get ready to oh, your pelvis is probably too small to birth that baby. I am telling you, I have seen Filipino women who are tiny, who are 90 pounds, less than 90 pounds, birth 11-pound babies. I have seen it happen with my own 2 eyes. And I'm telling you, it is not about whether your pelvis is too small or it's not too small. It's about the precedent that we set from that idea of rickets, where we wrote these medical journals that said some women have bad pelvises, so therefore they can't birth them, therefore we need C-sections, right? It's the convenience thing that Jocelyn was talking about. This precedence issue is everywhere, and it favors men over women. That's why we ended up having hospitals. This is literally the reason we end up having hospitals, because it's about convenience. We don't want to go from house to house. The doctor used to come to you or the midwife, but now we all have to go to one major place, which causes its own problems. We all have to go to one major place for convenience, because that's efficient. That's the masculine way to do it. And that's why we do what we do. But the point is, medicine is, I promise you, I could give you so many more examples of this. Medicine is built on precedent. It's not always built on evidence. We pretend that it's built on evidence, but if you go far back enough, the evidence comes from an assumption. The evidence always comes from an assumption somewhere. Always, 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 always. And so the point is that now, this is so ingrained in our societies. We have elevated doctors so much. And we did this in the law as well, because we start seeing them as saviors. Like Jocelyn said, we look at the TV shows, look around you, and that happened in the law too. There are plenty of laws and cases you can read where we are going to trust the doctor because doctors have saved us. The medicine is saving us. When, you know, the guy who invented hand washing, guess what? They threw him in jail. They literally threw him in jail because they thought he was crazy. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
science actually does, is when someone comes up with new ideas or points something wrong out to the medical system, you get thrown in jail. That's literally what
Yeah.
happens. Sorry. I'm on a
Right.
rampage.
No, I know. And again, this isn't to attack doctors, and it's not to attack people who are seeking out medical help. There are some useful things there. But the problem is where we have these blinders on, and it creates a lot of problems, for one thing. So, for instance, medicine is literally the leading cause of death in the US. Now, you're going to hear some other statistics from some other places, but when you look at independent research, those who are independent of the pharmaceutical industry, Western medicine is the leading cause of death by far every year in the US, far more than cancer, far more than heart disease. And you were talking about the laws. That is part of the problem, Julie. And I know I keep kind of getting ahead of the timeline here. Sorry. But we keep passing more and more laws, making it more and more difficult to sue pharmaceutical industries, to sue doctors. You have all these tort reforms and things like that. Even in Utah, I've written to my legislators, why are you passing this law? How does this help your constituents? All it does is it makes it so that if a doctor harms a patient, you have no recourse. There's nothing that you can do. They are so protected. It is a religious institution of sorts. And that's what people don't understand. Science is based on a philosophy. It's literally this philosophy that cannot be proven by the scientific method. And we grow up with these beliefs of reality, that this is what reality is. And we base all of our science on that reality. And that reality comes at the exclusion of everything spiritual, everything emotional. And if you're a spiritual person, that is simply not true. The spiritual is every bit as real as the physical. So when you truncate medicine in that way, when you cut that leg off of the stool, there's a lot of harm. And usually it's the most vulnerable in society that are harmed. And usually that is women, children, and the mentally ill. And that's why psychiatry is such a big focus of this conversation, because these are the people who we should be helping, and yet we're harming. And I mean that quite literally. When someone is diagnosed psychotic, and let's say there are parts in the world where maybe that haven't been as medicalized, studies have shown if they are never put on an antipsychotic, if they are never treated, about 70 to 75% of them just fade back into society. They just get better. Whereas in Western medicine, the inverse is true. If somebody is diagnosed psychotic and they are treated either through pharmaceuticals, which, by the way, antipsychotics are quite literally a chemical lobotomy. They cut off the blood flow to the frontal lobe, and they cause that part of the brain to shrink. Or if they are treated with electric convulsive treatments, that's shock therapy, that's making a comeback quite a lot because we're realizing that medications don't work. So when people are treated in these ways, about 75% of them never heal. And what's more, it becomes a degenerative condition. So they get worse and worse and worse. So we are harming the very people that we should be helping.
And many of us know this. I mean, we have seen in old movies how we used to treat people. I mean, we're still treating them under the guise of other things, but we used to be more out in the open of how poorly we treat people with mental illness, right? Putting them in cages and boxes. We've seen this. If you've ever watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, you can see how terribly people were treated. And that continued, right? So because the 17 to 1800, I mean, it's all important. The 1600s, all of what we've talked about is important. But I would say the 1800s really laid the foundation, because that's where we really came up with these guilds and what does it look like to be a doctor, and what is a psychiatrist. That's really where we get a lot of these assumptions. Mm-hmm. And in the 1800s was also when we start moving into cities, and also when we start compacting everybody. And then we get lots of disease because people are living closer together than they've ever lived. We don't have a great sewer system. We don't have things set up in a way that allow us to, clean ourselves and appropriately quarantine and things like that. And so then that's what we think of. We think of the era that's like disease ridden, all these people are going crazy. Well, all these babies are dying, and we don't realize that it's because of these shifts. It's because of these assumptions, and we're basing our whole lives on the assumptions of the 1800s, like Jocelyn talked about. So now this is where psychiatry continues to come into play big time. We're locking people in cages, we're locking them away. And then we come up with a great idea in the 1800s, because what comes along is, people are going to think I'm so crazy. Doesn't matter. It's true. You can look it up. Who comes along but Rockefeller? That's who comes along. Rockefeller comes along.
Yes.
And really what happens is, and people probably don't know this, but Rockefeller actually used to be treated with homeopathy. He had and this is literally in his biography, you guys. This is not like crazy, whatever. This is literally, you can look this up quite easily. He had a homeopath. He used homeopathy quite a lot, but there was a man who came up to him and told him, hey, his last name is Gates, which is hilarious.
That is interesting. Okay.
It's so interesting. Good golf buddy comes up to him and says, hey, we've figured out a way that we can use petrol and oil and make medicine out of it. We can make these medicines way cheaper. And guess what, Rockefeller, the oil king of everything, we can make you so much richer if you'll invest in pharmaceuticals. We can make you really rich. We can make this happen. At first he wasn't really into it. And by the way, he used a homeopath the whole rest of his life. Just saying.
He did. He didn't use his own medications.
No, he did not use his own medications. But he said, yeah, let's do it. Let's get together. And they call them pharmaceuticals. Okay. And can we talk about the word pharmakia? Should we talk about it?
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's in my book. So pharmakis was the original Greek word. And it actually meant someone that mixes medicine and the spiritual aspect. It was both of those things, like. And that also is associated with this word beneficia that I mentioned earlier, or medicine. And that is the word that actually turns into witchcraft. I don't know if that's where you're going with that, because I know it freaks out a lot of Christians when they're like, it means magic or it means witchcraft or something like that. It's like, well, yeah, it did, but that's because you didn't ever have any medicine that didn't have some spiritual, psychological, or energetic component. Healing was all of the above. So it's funny, right?
Well, the part I wanted to point out is pharmakia, according to Blue Letter Bible and the translation there, you can find this definition as well. Particularly that word pharmakia is to separate someone so much from themselves that evil spirits haunt them. It's to misuse an herb or a medicine. So you change the herb or the medicine so much that it now attracts evil spirits. And
oh man, that's so perfect.
Yes, isn't that perfect?
That is, okay. So we can talk about this from a scientific perspective, actually, if it makes people uncomfortable. So for instance, when somebody takes, let's say, a fluoroquinolone antibiotic, which, by the way, those are all the eye drops and the ear drops that they are prescribing now. They have a black box warning. They can cause tendons to rupture. They cross the blood-brain barrier. The doctor's going to tell you, no, they don't get into the blood because they're drops. They're wrong. I have the studies. I can show you. They absolutely do the same thing as taking them orally. So if you take a fluoroquinolone or if you take a benzodiazepine, we've shown this. You have these receptors, these peripheral benzodiazepine receptors that light up on a scan. They impact your mitochondria. Now, your mitochondria is the powerhouse of the body. It produces light, literally light energy. You see it glowing, right? When it produces this energy. So what these drugs do actually is they impact your ability to produce energy and light. They tamp that down. So it was really interesting. I've worked with thousands, I'm literally thousands of people who've been injured by these medications. And one of the most common complaints that I would hear from Christians is, I can't feel God. When they're dealing with a medical injury, they're like, I can't feel God anymore. Why can't I hear God's voice? Well, if you understand that God is light, I mean, maybe at a quantum level, quite literally, in some way, the quantum field, then that actually makes complete sense, because your ability to experience light and produce light and whatever and utilize light has literally been injured by these pharmaceuticals.
And that's why I bring it up. And some people might think that that's crazy. That's where the word pharma comes from. Pharmaceutical comes from this pharmakia, right? Which is on the surface medicine or mixing medicine, but definitely has these implications, at least in some translations, to separate you. It separates you. And from yourself. So yeah, and in the 1800s, this becomes a hit. Of course, Rockefeller, he's the wealthiest man there is. He pumps tons of money into this, and he becomes incredibly rich because they're all oil based. They're all petrol. So many of our, so many people don't realize how many of our products are still petrol based. You're rubbing petrol onto your skin all the time. And people will be like, oh, well, gas is toxic. People know, like, don't breathe in gas for too long. That can really hurt you. Well, you're putting it on your skin lots and lots of times. This is also petrol is how we make plastics many times, right? That's how we make plastic. So that's why this became so ubiquitous in so many different ways, is because a man with all the money was able to do that. And part of what he started to really invest in, because he started making the medicines, supplying them, is he started investing in medical institutions. He started investing in medical textbooks. He started investing and making it, for him, even though he used homeopathy, he was one of the biggest purveyors of using ads to make homeopathy look bad, to attack any form of medicine that was not petrol based, that was not pharmaceutical based. And so before this happened, before Rockefeller pumped in all this bad rhetoric, and this happens all the time, as someone who studied PR, by the way, and had to run PR campaigns, I promise you, even if you don't know this, this is the way it works. Like, it is very easy to slander someone.
Yeah. That's just how they do it. When they came out with cars, they introduced the term jaywalking so that you wouldn't walk across the street, and they made you sound like some idiot country bumpkin who didn't know how to walk down a road properly. I mean, it's just how these industries work.
Yes. And that's how it worked, right? America used to have one of the biggest homeopathic societies in the world. We had huge institutions, so much. And I'm not saying homeopathics are the only way to go or whatever, but it's just to show that different forms of medicine and herbs, that's when they started to get a bad rap. That's when we started inventing terms to keep herbs and homeopathics out of what we use to get natural stuff away. And the reason really was money. And like, I'm sorry if that hurts people's feelings, but it's really not that hard to look up. It's really not that hard to see the influence. And so then all that medical students are learning is pharmaceuticals, which ties back to psychiatrics as well.
And what's important to understand why the Rockefeller thing ties in, it's important to understand that how powerful he became and how powerful that industry became because of that money. So what people may not know is that pharmaceutical lobbyists in our government far outnumber and outweigh monetarily in everything, every other lobbying institution. They're bigger than big agra, big food, right? They're bigger than the military industrial complex. They are the biggest, the most wealthy, the most influential industry entity in our government. It's insane how much money our legislators and leaders get paid by the pharmaceutical industry. And you can see it. You can see how they're voting. Like, look at in your own state. Somebody gets in and they're campaigning on this, on that, and then all of a sudden they shift a position or whatever. Look at where the money's coming from. It's probably coming from the pharmaceutical industry. So they are so powerful. And we have to remember, again, because Rockefeller is such a great example, because his purpose was not, let's heal the world. Obviously, that was not his goal. The goal is to make money. And because that is the foundation, the medical industry is focused on making money. It's a profit-driven industry. And psychiatry, because they are so heavily focused on pharmaceuticals to legitimize themselves, right, as this medical industry, they have to prescribe pharmaceuticals. So that's why you have all of these diagnoses that go hand in hand with these drugs. And I could go into those drugs are based on, but I know you've got some more history to go through, so I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, and just the history portion of this, right? This goes into the 1900s. Rockefeller doesn't die until, I don't know, 1900s, but he's done as well a good push. People also probably don't know this about science. So we're producing pharmaceuticals long before we have even the idea of a placebo. The first time we even think of the idea. Now we're so like, you better test it against a placebo. Oh my gosh, the RCTs. Why are there RCTs for this? Like, I'm like, because there hasn't been. There's really actually no such thing as a randomized control study. Sorry. Like, we can try real hard, but it's very difficult from someone who's worked in research for a long time. But even the idea of a placebo, of trying something against a pharmaceutical to see what it is. So for people who don't know what a placebo is, it's where you either get like a sugar pill or a saline shot or something that does not have the medication. And so in a study, what you do is give half the people a fake medication, a placebo that's not going to do anything to them or hurt them. And then you give the other half the medication. And the idea is to see what happens, right? It helps us to track if people are getting hurt, if the medicine really works. And because there is this thing called the placebo effect, which drugs are supposed to surpass the placebo effect. And most of them actually do not. I would say the vast majority never truly get over the placebo effect.
No, statistically. So you have a study that came out in 1955 that showed 1 in 3 medical healings is a result of the placebo effect. Now, that was never followed up because that's not going to make the industry money. And people need to remember, what is it, like 80 to 90% of medical schools are funded by the pharmaceutical industry. So these doctors are literally educated by the pharmaceutical industry. But we do have other studies that show that antidepressants work no better or less than a placebo. So yeah, and don't even get me started on the chemical imbalance theory. That's not even true. We've totally put the nail in the coffin on that one. We've had multiple meta-analyses that are like, this is not a thing. Chemical imbalance is not a thing. So if your doctor tells you, oh, it's like diabetes, sorry, there's no scientific evidence for that. It's not a serotonin imbalance.
No.
But also there are other findings that show that only 38% of medical treatments are beneficial, just medical treatments in general, including pharmaceuticals. And 62% are neither negative or have no benefit at all. So it's incredible how much healing actually does take place if you think about it. It's amazing how many people do get on an antidepressant or some drug and are like, I'm doing better. But what we don't realize is how much of that might actually be spiritual, emotional, situational in nature, and that you're healing in spite of these drugs, which actually create really awful adverse effects.
Yes. Well, and you know, a lot of that is the placebo effect. That's why so many times you go on a medication and you're like, I'm good for a while, but after a while I need a higher dose, right? We got to higher my dose because it's just not working the way that it did before. And that's because it was truly the placebo effect that was helping you. And now we've got to up it so you can get the placebo effect again.
Or add in more drugs, which, by the way, are never studied in combination. And I just want to put this out there. Now they're coming out with combo drugs. Now they're combining them into one pill. And again, these have never been studied in combination with each other. We don't know what these do to people. They're never studied on children. And yet we're giving them to children. The number one pharmaceutical prescribed to adolescent girls is birth control. But the number 2 is antidepressants. And we've had so many lawsuits of youth committing suicide. And the pharmaceutical industries know this because they do many, many trials of their drugs. And they know that they cause these things. But the problem is the way that our system is set up. They only have to submit 3 positive trials, to the FDA to prove that their drug is safe and effective. Well, they could have 3. And that say that their drug is neither safe nor effective. But if they can manipulate the trial and the information well enough to show that it is, then the FDA approves it. And then you start having all these people who are, developing breasts or committing suicide or whatever. And that information does not come out until it goes to trial, until they have to make these records public, which they do not unless they are sued.
They don't. And there are so many examples of this, right? Like let's look at even recent examples of like Teflon to bring it out to another product that's not quite as a hot topic, right? Pots and pans. For the longest time, people scoffed at this idea that your pots and pans could give you cancer, that they could be bad for you, that these pots and pans made from Teflon could hurt you. And then what happened? There was a giant case, literally took 15 years huge case. And guess what? DuPont, who creates Teflon, had literally hundreds of studies. They knew that it was causing cancer. They 100% knew, but they were able to get 3 or 4 studies that they could submit to the FDA so that they could, put these pots and pans out there. And that's how they did it. And all of this came out in court later, and the PFOAs and everything. And now people are like, oh, same thing happened with lead and lead-based paint forever. Everyone's like, lead's so safe. It's so safe for you. It's so good. Like mercury. Let's talk, want to talk about Michigan and Michigan's water, Flint, Michigan. What happened to them for years? They denied nothing. No, actually, it's been poisoning everyone for years and years and years and years. So this is not new. Like, this is not new. But when we go up against a bigger giant like the pharmaceutical industry, who is very powerful, and we're talking about people's health, especially women's health, that's where it gets really sticky. That's where people get a lot of cognitive dissonance. We get really scared about it because of what we've been told. And because a big part of the reason, I'm sure you're going to touch on this, Jocelyn, is we've talked about women are more prone to spiritual gifts. They are more prone to having spiritual experiences and to wanting to be in their feminine and to experience these things. They're more prone to depression, big time, because of the way we handle birth, which is why I want to talk about that, and the way that women have been marginalized over time. But now, psychiatry it's so much harder to talk about this because people are like, well, this is helping me, and the doctor said I should do it. Even Dr. Kelly Brogan, who is a holistic psychiatrist, she prescribed medication for years and years. One of the things that she talks about is psychiatry is one of the only medicines where we don't actually look at your brain before we prescribe something to you. We don't do scans. We don't do blood tests. Nope. We just listen to what you say, and then we decide to give you medication based on the things that you say without actually looking at your body, which is so unscientific. If we want to get back to the scientific method, that's the silliest thing that we could do, right?
Well, but the other thing too is, again, along with the Weltanschauung of what we've been raised to believe, like the chemical imbalance myth. I'm sure if you went down the road and asked anybody what causes depression, they're probably going to say serotonin, right? We've just been taught this. It's been commercialized. I mean, you had President Clinton in the 90s, who at first we limited how much the pharmaceutical industry could advertise to the public, but he removed that. And boy, those ads just exploded. We have been inundated. We have been indoctrinated from the time we have been little with these kinds of things. So that's one part of it. The other part is the way the drugs are designed. Psychiatric medications in particular are really difficult to get off of. Now, back in the day, if somebody needed a tranquilizer, they'd prescribe barbiturates, which, by the way, are making a comeback again. But everybody was, abusing those. Okay, so now we're giving them Valium. But then people start abusing that. That's the bad guy. So now we have all these newer, shorter, quote, acting benzodiazepines like Klonopin, Xanax, Ativan or lorazepam, even Ambien or Lunesta. Those are all the same category, technically, scientifically speaking, maybe not pharmaceutical industry speaking. And so what happened is they started developing much more potent doses in very, very small pills. So for instance, the biggest dose of Valium that you can get is a 10 milligram pill, and you can kind of split that, maybe and kind of get off of it. But lorazepam, it says it's only 2 milligrams in this little teeny tiny pill, but compared to Valium, one little 2 milligram pill is worth 20 milligrams of Valium. That's double the highest dose of Valium you can get. So people, when they do try and stop them, are like, I don't like this, I want to get off of it. You are reducing from a massive dose of a mind-altering, physiologically altering medication that has changed your body to such an extent that if you stop it too suddenly, you could have a seizure now and die. So when people believe, well, I need these, part of it is because of conditioning and because of physical conditioning. We can't get off of these drugs. They are so impossibly difficult. That's why I have a whole channel dedicated to teaching people how to get off of these medications. It's called Benzo Brains. Don't ever suddenly stop one of these meds. The antidepressants, antipsychotics, any of them, ADHD meds, they can be so difficult and dangerous to get off of. And they're designed that way.
They are. And I promise you, from a legal standpoint, I have been in cases where I get to do something called discovery, and I get to pull all of the inter-office memos and all the things that the pharmaceutical company, whoever it is, is saying, and I get to read those and we get to present them in court. And I promise you, they know that they're doing it on purpose because they ask. They tell the people, well, that's not strong enough to keep them on it forever. I swear.
Yeah.
These are the things they say. We need to make it stronger. Oh, literally, we need to make this in doses so that this is a monthly refill or a weekly refill because that's what we need financially. I know that sounds crazy. I promise you, I have read them. You can look up these papers. You can look up cases.
Oh, there are cases. I can show you the case studies too, where they've gone in, they have the testimonies. This is how we got the opioid epidemic. You know, they fudged the research, they lied to the doctors, you know, and they created different medications that were more addictive. That was what they were designed to be.
On purpose.
Yeah.
And they know. They might claim that they don't know, but when we go down into discovery, we always find that they know. We always find that they had red flags, and then they do things to dilute those red flags. And I think we better tie this a little bit back into women, particularly. You know, women suffer from this. Not that men don't suffer from this, but women particularly suffer from this because women are, like exactly what Jocelyn said, they're more likely to get prescribed antidepressants, psychiatrics, and that's going back to precedent, right? Because a long time ago, we said women are more apt to get hysteria and to be hysterical and to have mental issues. So that still affects us today.
Right.
The birth issue affects us today. One of the pharmaceuticals we do have to talk about because it's so prevalent in women is the number one use, which is birth control and how this applies to controlling.
No, and that perfectly goes hand in hand. So what I was on my mind is more women are prescribed psychiatric medications. Now, there are reasons for that. Like you said, there's precedent for that. But also, so 1 in 4 women over the age of 40 is prescribed a psychiatric drug. That means 1 in 4 women probably that you know is on one of these drugs. Now, why? Well, because medicine, like you said, it's based on men. A lot of the testing is done on men. We don't understand perimenopause. We don't diagnose it. Women start going through hormonal changes in their bodies or in their cycles. And instead of addressing the nutritional imbalance, instead of addressing the hormonal imbalance, we just diagnose women as crazy and put them on antipsychotics. And by antipsychotics, a lot of people think those are antidepressants. They're not. Look at your drug. A lot of them that are now marketed or prescribed as sleeping pills or antidepressants are actually antipsychotics. So that's just my little thing there. But the other thing too we have to understand is all these women are put on birth control. So our bodies, our hormones from the time we are young are being manipulated, are being depleted because they do deplete you of certain nutrients and things like that. And then you get to childbearing age, right? And you're having these babies and you have women who have like the MTHFR gene and they can't properly metabolize the folate, right? Well, it's that we metabolize it differently. So we have all of these foods that have folic acid in them that's supposed to help with that. But if you can't metabolized folic acid, which is a synthetic version of folate, then it depletes you even more of folate. So all these women who are taking prenatals, right, and there's these vitamins that have all this stuff in it, it's actually depleting you more. And so then you're giving it all to your baby. Then you have a baby and now your hormone, and maybe the doctor decided that you needed to have a C-section or whatever, or you were put on an antidepressant because of all these things that are going on. And now you've had this major shift and you just went through like a major surgery and you have this baby and you're all alone in your home by yourself with no aunts, no cousins, no women there to come and help you. And your husband's off, maybe he's working or you need to get back to a job and you're completely depleted physically, right? And all of a sudden now it's like, oh, this woman's crazy. I mean, she's got postpartum depression. She's just depressed. It's like, if your body had been through all of that, you would be depressed too. And it would not be because there's something wrong with you. It's because everything wrong that has been done to you and that is going on around you.
Yes. And it's so multifaceted. Exactly what Jocelyn's saying. This is partially food, and the issues with our food is also affecting all of us and women and our ability to keep up our stores so we're not so depleted. And then we've got medications double depleting us. And so, of course, women get labeled with this. But the big thing, is we're starting women so young. on birth control, we're starting you from the very beginning, right? 10-year-olds. I've met 8-year-olds,
Oh,
10-year-olds
yeah.
on
Yes.
birth control. And this is because we've adopted this system that for every ill, there is a pill. And because we have not done the studies, this is another piece which we didn't even get to, but Jocelyn mentioned a little bit. We have done all of our studies, all of our health studies are mostly done on men because women are seen as too complex because of their hormone levels.
Yep.
We can't trust that. I have been to you when we were creating studies where we have thrown women populations out of the study because it's too complex. Their issues, their hormones are going to change the study. And if we take them out, then it makes our stuff look way better because we take them out. So we have not done a very good job in science. I mean, we didn't even know until the 70s or the 80s really what women's anatomy looks like, what it was like, how to help women anatomy wise. Men used to think all kinds of crazy things, like they would teach people that when you breastfeed, milk only comes out of the tip of your nipple. It's so wrong. So many things about women's anatomy, their clitorises, like there's just so much we don't have time to go into. It's just crazy. But I really want to address the birth control issue because it's the most common medication women are going to be put on in their life, and they're going to feel like they must be put on, and because it has been sold to them as a savior. It's another savior drug, just like doctors are saviors and medications are saviors and the medical system is our savior. The birth control, more than any other, because it was so touted in the 60s during the feminist movement, they really pushed it on women to be, this is going to save you. This is going to allow you to have freedom. And so many women listening to this are like, yeah, I don't know what I would do without it. And now we use it for everything. We band-aid everything. And, oh, you have endometriosis. Birth control. You have thyroid issues, birth control. You just got your period, better put you on birth control. Oh my gosh. And it has hurt women so much. Some of the side effects of birth control that people don't understand is it makes you attracted to people you wouldn't usually be attracted to. That's one of the biggest things. You can't tell whether or not you're actually attracted to people, which is why so many women will get married or they decide to have a baby with someone. And then when they get off of the birth control, they're like, I think I want to divorce my spouse, or I think I need to break up with this person. Because the birth control is gone now and it is affecting your attraction, your sex drive, your libido. And we're doing this to very, very young girls, right? Which it can also cause acne. It can cause bloating. It wrecks your cycle and it's a band-aid and it's not helping you. It takes away your intuition. So what can we help women with birth control wise? How can we help them?
Well, first of all, I just want to point out what you were saying there. Like, if you have thyroid problems, if you've got this, if you've got that, give them this. You notice how the solution was never, why do you have thyroid problems? Why do you have endometriosis? So the number one thing is get to know your body. What is going on? Ask the questions. Why should I take that drug? What is going on here in the first place? And yes, spiritual and physical go together. I am living evidence of that there could be something emotional, spiritual going on. We have studies now that show this, that could be affecting your physical body. So one of the number one things, first of all, I would say, and I always recommend this for people who are trying to heal, is find a naturopathic doctor, an ND. They can prescribe, they're doctors, but they also look at the whole thing. And maybe they're not going to look at the psychiatry, the psychology, or they're not going to look at the spiritual, but they will at least look at the nutritional more. They will look at the hormonal more. And they will look at proteins differently and see what's responding to what. But for me, the thing that gave me true sexual freedom, again, was understanding my body. And I read a book back in the early 2000s called Taking Charge of Your Fertility. And it was so simple. These women, before birth control, they didn't have to be having baby after baby after baby. We've had this knowledge for a long time. Hildegard von Bingen developed the first pregnancy test back in the 1100s. But these things were suppressed, right? Again, 1400, they started suppressing. So hundreds of years later, you get to this medical establishment and women have no idea what their bodies are doing. Your body's very intelligent. It only ovulates once a month. It's actually not that hard once you figure it out. You learn the signs of your cervical fluid and the position of your cervix. And you learn how to feel for that. And maybe you take your temperature, like I never even had to do that. I was so regular. I've never gotten pregnant accidentally, and I've always gotten pregnant exactly when I wanted to because I understood my body's cycles. And that's really what this is about, isn't it? It's about separating us from that knowledge and that intuition about our bodies and somebody taking over and telling us this is what it is and this is what you have to do, when actually our bodies are very intelligent. I want to tell you, and I have her permission to do this. So I have an adult daughter who came to us, a little bit later in life, and she became a part of our family. Then she got married and they moved to another state, and she had her first baby during the COVID epidemic. So it was just so awful. Poor thing. They weren't even going to let her husband be in there, much less me. I couldn't be there with her. And there was so much fear that they had about this disease and everything that's going on and getting the jabs and things like that. So she had her baby in a very heightened state of stress. It was a very miserable experience for her. And then he did actually have this weird kind of condition that when mingled with her blood, not Rh negative factor, it was something else. But when her blood mixed in, it caused him to have his liver to be taxed quite a bit. And so, he did need some extra medical care. Anyway, it got to the point where when she came out to visit us with the baby, I had no idea how bad her mental health had gotten. She had become so OCD about germs because of this disease and everything that's going around. I literally, and thankfully I knew how, literally had to implement OCD therapy with my daughter and do exposure therapies with her so that she would let her son feed himself because she didn't want him to get himself dirty. I mean, it was really bad, okay? Okay, so fast forward, she's having her second baby. Now, she's developed some preeclampsia. It's pretty painful. Her husband's been deployed and she's just in a rough situation. She gets quite depressed again. But I'm able to be out there this time. And she goes with her husband to the hospital because they need to induce her because of the preeclampsia. But now she has done some hypnobirthing courses. She knows a bit more about her body. She's conditioned herself to be able to do that. And although she was up all night with the toddler and she was so stressed out again, and she's worried, oh no, what if this baby has the same problem? We won't know until the baby's delivered. So she texts me. She's like, I need you. I show up. She hasn't progressed at all. They're pumping her full of Pedersen and all this stuff. And she's just frazzled out of her mind. And so her doula friend shows up at the same time that I do. So the nurses leave. We send her husband away because he's a mess. And we start getting to work. When was the last time you've eaten? Well, obviously not since the night before, because you can't eat when you show up early in the morning to the hospital because they don't want you to throw up because that's inconvenient for them. Not that it's going to harm you or the baby, but no, you can't eat. So we're like, you're eating. So we give her some food. I start working on some acupressure points on her foot. And then I asked her, do you want to do a meditation? She said yes. So everybody's out of the room and I just pray for the right words. And I just start talking to her about the intelligence of her body and the intelligence of her baby. And how her baby knows what to do and her body knows what to do. And there's nothing that you have to do, right? The medical system is about doing, but this is about just letting go, right? And letting this natural instinct take over. The nurse comes back in and she's like, oh, wow, you're going into active labor. Oh yeah, I better start preparing. Okay. And my daughter asks if they can reduce the pain meds because she's like, I think I need to feel my body. And they're really reticent. They're like, oh, but if you're in labor for a long time, she's like, I really need to feel my body. So they reduce the pain meds. So after the nurse leaves, I do the pressure points again. We do another meditation and she feels, well, no, in the first meditation, actually, when I invited her daughter to come into this world, she felt the baby drop all of a sudden right then. So we did another meditation. The nurse comes back in. She goes, oh my gosh, you're ready to deliver this baby. Don't do anything. She's freaking out. She's calling the doctor. She's yelling to the point where my daughter's like, can you be more quiet? Because she's in such a relaxed state now, right? I whisper in her ear, you don't have to wait for anyone. These nurses are perfectly capable of delivering this baby without the doctor. They know what to do. You do what feels natural for you. And like 19 minutes later, that baby's out. And yeah, the doctor didn't have time to get there. And that doctor was ticked. But she had a beautiful delivery. And the most beautiful thing about it is she's laying there and she's like, I feel heaven. This feels like heaven. The veil is so thin. And for the 10 days afterwards, she was in this state of pure bliss. She just kept saying, it's heaven, it's heaven. And she was so depressed before I got there. She was literally, I think she was considering ending her life. And yet after taking charge, it's not just a physical thing. It's spiritual, it's emotional. You have to address all of those when it comes to this. And because of that, it's like she just had this amazing, beautiful healing experience with her second baby.
I love that. Yeah. And it's more possible for us than we think. And I just want to address that, like, so many times, I think so many people's rebuttal is for this is like, well, this medical procedure was necessary for me. This medical thing is necessary for me. It saved my life. It helped me with this or that. And what about your daughter? She had preeclampsia. She could have died, right? And I think looking at this, I have had preeclampsia before as well. Part of the problem is, like you said, it's spiritual, it's emotional. We're not saying that every single procedure is unnecessary or that every single medical thing is unnecessary. Or like you said at the beginning, there are good things that have come out of it. We're not telling everyone, don't go to the hospital. That's not the point of it. The point of it is to understand the precedent, to understand your personal power, to understand how you can insert your personal power. And honestly, I think more things are unnecessary than we think, like you pointed out, but they become necessary because of our mental state, because of the experiences we have, because of the layered experiences we've had with the medical system, including being put on pharmaceuticals for so long. And then we have to use the hospital, or we have to do these things because we have built up to this. So instead of looking at the root, and that's all that we're advocating for, is looking at yourself holistically, taking charge of your own body, taking charge of your femininity, including the spirit and the mind and the heart in this, not discluding them, and to understand a lot of these things are not made because they're actually good for you. They're made because they're convenient and they make someone else money. So just being open and aware to that, doing more of your own research for it, and above all, taking back your own bodily autonomy. It may be the right decision for you to have a procedure, to go into the hospital. That may be the right decision for you. But just understanding, right, there are ways you can tap into your feminine and your intuition. And there are ways that you can work with these things, even if you're on birth control, even if you're on psychiatrics. This is not shaming anybody. It's not about shaming you at all. It's about helping you take charge of you again.
Yeah. Yeah. And taking back your autonomy, question everything. It's okay to question. Doctors are not gods. They don't know everything. They can't possibly know the pharmacology of every single drug. And yes, they will get upset if you Google it. But guess what? You're going to get more information from Google or from AI right now, because the doctor can't contain all that information. They know what they know, and they can be helpful with what they know, but it should be a collaborative process. It should not be this top down, I tell you what to do and you do it. And that's part of the problem, that we do kind of believe that, because we do put them up on a pedestal. It's okay to question. Please question everything and think about it and meditate on it and take your time. And know that it is the voice within that truly has the ultimate authority and say so over what you do and don't get to do with your own body. And I think that the more that women take back that power, I know so many women who are being inspired now to have their babies naturally. I think we're waking up to this understanding that we've been stripped of something that's incredibly powerful and incredibly important.
Yes, we have. And for, we're not telling everyone you have to have a natural birth to be empowered. That's not the message. Yeah. But the message here is just to take it into your own hands. Like Jocelyn said, we want to reunite your mind, body, and spirit back together. We want you to take back your feminine gifts. Mm-hmm. And that's the point. The point of this whole conversation is to help you see, okay, it's not just me. It's not like my problem. Maybe there is more for me, but it's just layered under all of this stuff. And there's so much. I know there'll be people out there who'll be like, well, there's so much you guys didn't get to talk about when it comes to the medical industry. And we didn't. This would be a 5-hour conversation if we were to do it justice, to talk about everything. Hopefully you can kind of see how through history, the medical establishment, everything we believe is layered, that it comes from precedent, assumption, not just evidence. And that, that's the other thing. We have to remember science is always changing. If it's true science, then it should be open to change. If it's true science, it should be open to questions. It should be open to collaboration. And we just need to be more aware and listen again to our intuition. We want to give you power to listen to your own intuition and your own body and to learn for yourself.
Yeah. And to question the things that we assume are truths that are hard and fast scientific rules, because they're not so hard and fast or scientific as we think. And it's okay. It's okay. And yes, you'll be called crazy, or you might be called a Karen, or heaven forbid, you'll be called a witch. But shame has always been used to silence people who are trying to speak up and defend the truth and what's right. So you're in good company.
You are. You're in good company. And please don't do, just like Jocelyn said, please, we're just telling you, please don't do something just because someone told you to. Whether it's me and Jocelyn, or it's your doctor, or whoever it is, or it's, your political party or whatever, don't just do something because somebody told you to. And, that's the thing to do. And you're showing your allegiance or whatever it is.
Right. And if you're prescribed Cyprocin eye or eardrops, just ask for another antibiotic. They don't have to give you that one. They don't have to give you one that was designed for chemo treatments. They can give you something a little less potent, than something that's designed to kill anthrax.
Yes. So if people have more questions about this for you, Jocelyn, and I mean, Jocelyn is a wealth of knowledge. She has so much stuff out there. Where can they find that stuff?
Yeah, well, as far as for medical questions, that would be more in alignment probably with my BenzoBrains channel and website. You can go there. I'm always happy also to answer any questions anywhere. My other channel is The Woman in the Wilderness, in light of my book that's coming out. It used to formerly be the Teachings of Jesus Christ channel, but now it is The Woman in the Wilderness, and that's also on Facebook. So you can even private message me through that on Facebook, like whatever. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with us, Jocelyn.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.